Welcome, my friend, to the Chasing Poker Greatness podcast. As always, this is your host, the founder of ChasingPokerGreatness.com, Coach Brad Wilson. Today is a very philosophical day. I'm not sure how today's show is going to go. I'm quite nervous in anticipation. Duncan, my co-host, Philosophical Friday. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. Would you say you're a little bit uncertain how to get?
I am a little bit uncertain. In fact, which segues nicely into today's topic. You can break it down for the listener.
For sure, yeah. So one of the villagers, Ben, who's a frequent contributor in the forums, had an excellent question, and his question was, about uncertainty. What is uncertainty? How do we deal with uncertainty? Where does it show up in poker? How does it affect the game? Can we use it to our advantage? And questions like that. And of course, I'm paraphrasing. I'm adding a little bit. And to be fair, this is a question that has been, I know, in your mind for a long time, and in my mind too. Like, this is the question that we've been thinking for a very, 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 very long time, because poker, and it's part, I should say, of what we would call variance, right? I mean, all of these fluctuations that sometimes, we do one thing and an unexpected response happens. And that unexpected response can be either in the form of our opponent does something we wouldn't expect, or perhaps the deck brings something that we wouldn't expect. Of course, you play this game long enough, you start to expect the unexpected, but there was a time where, we were surprised that I guess, our flush lost to a full house or something like that, when we're starting out. So there's always things surprising at some point, and uncertainty basically creeps in everywhere is what I'm getting at.
For sure.
Yeah.
So starting out this conversation, right? The first question is, what is uncertainty?
Right.
If we try to distill it down to nuts and bolts, what is uncertainty exactly?
Right. So uncertainty is probably the easier way to understand uncertainty is by understanding the opposite of it, which would be a deterministic outcome, an outcome which is always the same or expected, or it doesn't fluctuate. So we can think of uncertainty as the fluctuation of a certain outcome. For instance, I guess the easiest way is you flip a coin. You're uncertain on whether the coin is going to land on heads or tails. But if you were to record this, if you were to record you flipping the coin, and then you record the flipping of the coin, and the coin comes up out heads, let's say, and now you play the tape backwards, there is no more uncertainty anymore. When you play the tape again, it's going to land on, what did I say? Did I say head or tails? I don't even remember.
I can't remember.
But it's going to land. It's going to land.
I'm certain it's going to be one of those.
That's exactly right. So that's actually another form of uncertainty. Like our memory it's funny that happened, because actually our memories also create uncertainties. We can have a certain outcome, but just because our memory is vague on something, it creates a certain amount of uncertainty. So it's basically any deviation from something that would otherwise be standard, any form of noise, any form of fluctuation, any form of discrepancy of what we'd otherwise consider a straightforward path. Not a straight path, but a straightforward path with no deviations.
Yeah, it also creates certainty sometimes, like with the Mandela effect, when there is not certainty, right? We're convinced that something happened, but the reality was that it didn't happen that way, or
right,
a scene didn't happen in a movie that we just have always imagined or very certain that it did, right?
Exactly right.
So, yeah, memory can be fallible.
Yeah. Exactly correct, and that creates for an interesting dynamic. I mean, you mentioned movie, and in one of the previous podcasts, like I was convinced that Fat Thor was in Ragnarok, and as a matter of fact, he wasn't. So that's, again, like all of these fluctuations from the actual, they're a form of uncertainty. But another type of uncertainty is, I mean, you have a deck of cards, and we're going on the turn, and we're uncertain as to what the turn card is going to be. So it doesn't, the uncertainty doesn't only come in the form of vagueness, right? It can just be multiple possible outcomes. So sure. Anything that, basically any mental or physical or any sort of path that it is not straightforward, so it can be A or B or C or whatever, that has a uncertainty baked into it, which makes sense in poker too.
Yeah, so there's the micro aspect of uncertainty, which is like an individual hand to hand basis, and then action to action basis, and then villain specific and board run out specific uncertainty. Like you're playing defensive on the river, and villain has a spectrum of bets to choose from. You don't know exactly which one they're going to choose. Or villain just, you check and they like 4x the river, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so that's something that you were not expecting. So there's a lot of uncertainty, especially like when you're playing defensive. Even on the other side, when you're like all in on the river as a bluff, and you have the sweat, right? There's still uncertainty, right, as to whether or not villain is going to call or fold.
Absolutely. And there's also uncertainty in you don't know what it also means. Typically, a specific bet sizing may mean something for the population, but for that specific villain may mean something else.
On this specific run out in this specific situation, given all, the pre-flop formation, the pre-flop action, the flop texture, all of these data points, right? So
exactly.
yeah, I guess the first question that, you were asking, like, what is uncertainty? And yes, these are all facets of it. Like I said, the macro is going to be like your, day-to-day session results, your week-to-week
Right.
session results, your month-to-month session, your year-to-year, your overall career, lifetime results playing poker.
Right.
We don't know what those are, right? And yeah, so we wanted to touch on, like, is uncertainty a thing, basically,
Right.
right? That was
Right.
one of the things in our
Right. Is
bullet
it
points.
present in life and in poker? Is it something that happens, or is it something that just because poker players happen to have it a lot, we just sort of like bias thinking that uncertainty? Oh, you know what? There's so much uncertainty in poker, but uncertainty doesn't exist in real life. It's not something that.
I mean, it exists like all the time, right? Like yesterday, here's a good example of uncertainty, right? Like, I didn't get good sleep, right? Like I didn't get good sleep. I didn't know if I could perform well doing this podcast episode, so we had to postpone,
Right.
right? So like, we don't know how we're going to sleep. We don't know how, you eat food at your favorite restaurant, and then like you don't know whether or not you're going to get food poisoning. You don't know how if you're going to get indigestion. You don't know if you're going to catch a cold from somebody that you're in the restaurant with, right? So like you don't know when you're turning out of your house or complex or whatever, you're going to get T-boned by an erratic driver. I read an article. Somebody was driving the wrong way on a highway, right? And just smashed into another car and multiple fatalities, right? So there's uncertainty when you pull on to the highway as to whether or not somebody who is just going to be going the wrong way and smash into you, right? So like I would say that in every facet of life, almost every action that can be taken, there's uncertainty.
Absolutely. And to double down with this, I mean, we wake up, if we knew exactly, we wake up in the morning, right? I mean, if we knew exactly how the day was going to go, we might as well, be bored with it, right? I mean, like why live the day, right? But the thing is that every day has an exciting aspect to it, because exactly we don't know how it's going to turn out. Or same thing, we want to hang out with a friend. If we knew how the meeting was going to go, why go and do it? I mean, we've done it before, but there's always this aspect. It can be an exciting aspect, it can be scary aspect depending on the situation. Like you said, I mean, you go out on the street, you
Is
drive
it the situation or is it framing?
it.
I think that like framing plays a role. I mean, sort of excluding the danger side of it, where you get, just smashed in your car, right? That's obviously, it doesn't matter how you frame that. That's going to be a really bad outcome. But I think like one thing that sprang to my mind was like coaching sessions, right? I'm never certain as to how they're going to go. I used to feel a lot of anxiety before coaching sessions because I had this pressure of we need to find leaks. We need to, I need to find things that influence, impact this player, like in
So they
this
can
hour
improve.
that we have together, right? And there's uncertainty, like I haven't seen the full video that they sent me. What if I don't find anything? What if we don't uncover anything? What if I can't explain something in a way that they can
Right.
understand? So like even in those, but ultimately, what I find is that the uncertainty, in my opinion, is, I think you were alluding to this before I interrupted you, but an exciting part of life. I think it's the unexpected is kind of what makes life worth living, when you don't know what's going to happen. Um, to me, I would hate to know how every single day is going to be exactly when I woke up. That would be just a terrible day.
Or when we're going to die, right? Yeah, I mean, it's all about, there's certain things that we sort of don't want to know, want to discover as we go, which is part of the reason why we like stories, we like movies, and things like that. And even if we do something, repetitively, like seeing a friend, or like watching a movie, or playing the same hand again, there's always going to be something new and exciting, which is part of the reason why we're doing it, right? I mean, there is always an element of surprise that can come to it, and the thing that is interesting about that element of surprise is we don't know exactly how we're going to be surprised. That's another thing too, but we know it happens so frequently, we sort of like, we do it anyway. Yeah, exactly. We anticipate that there's going to be something surprising, because the opposite is also true. When we sometimes get into, you hear people say that all the time, like getting into these situations where their lives feel repetitive in some sense. So that's because the element of surprise, although not 100% eliminated, it has been suppressed, right? So that element of surprise is no longer as vivid and as present as it was perhaps in the past, which, by the way, how could that connect to poker, right? Let's talk about poker a little bit. Like, how can one keep the game fresh, so that keep that uncertainty, of that surprise, the beneficial part of uncertainty, the surprising factor, that factor alive in their games.
Yeah, I think it kind of reminds me of my conversation with Lucky Chewy and on CPG. He was talking about the Magic Deck, right? Just like the Magic Deck provides almost unlimited possibilities, right? Like, what is the Magic Deck going to give me today? What is this turn and river card going to be, right? And I think that framing of looking at it as this thing that has ultimate, almost unlimited possibilities, that will surprise you, and take you to a place that maybe you haven't been before, right? I think that's just that to me is like a very positive, good framing that allows him to be curious about situations, and then to play poker by using curiosity, and even when like things don't go well. I think curiosity is probably the way that you should follow, should be your guide in your poker career, just because curiosity, you ask questions, you learn, and you investigate, right? So anyway, yeah, I think Chewy said it best there, where there's uncertainty on the flop, there's uncertainty on the turn, there's uncertainty on the river. It's a Magic Deck, and just kind of embrace this magic quality of the game of poker.
Exactly. And if you couple that with the investigative aspect, the curiosity that you're talking about, maybe you can find elements that surprise you too, right?
Sure.
I mean, maybe you will see, because you're saying, oh, I mean, I didn't know somebody can actually play that spot that way. Oh, I didn't know, you can, whatever, like, double check raise somebody, I mean.
It's funny that you say that, because just before we fired up this call, me, John, and Shu were in a strategy session, and we were looking at data points and, data point prioritization, and just basically mapping out a hand based on all the thoughts that we had street by street. And the first hand that we broke down, one of the things, it was a 3-bet pot. The flop was 6-9-10 with 2 diamonds. We were in the cutoff, villains on the button. We called the 3-bet. Flop goes check, check, and there we had some depth, right? And one assumption that we all made was that villains likely capped because they check back the flop, right? We do not think they're checking back like 7-8 or their sets.
Right.
Mostly, probably checking back most of their range. And then
you said 2 diamonds, right?
Yeah, 2 diamonds.
Okay.
Diamonds.
Oh no, just making sure.
Yeah, so basically, like, they're betting some flush draws, equity-driven hands, and then some 2 pairs, some straight, some sets, maybe some backdoor, nut flush draw, etc. So we map out this whole hand with our thoughts on every single street, formulating plans based on past assumptions, and we make it to the river, and villain has a set of 10s.
Oh, set of 10s. Okay.
Yeah, they flop top set.
Top set. Yeah. Okay.
Which basically, we just made a whole strategy and built out all of our future thought process based on an incorrect assumption that was
I love
surprising,
incorrect
right?
assumptions. I love incorrect assumptions so much. Like I love them so much. It's just, I mean, I implore my students to actually make incorrect assumptions. They're so beautiful. Incorrect assumptions is just the best way to improve in this game, but actually having them as opposed to have none. But what an interesting example, right? Because here you have two opposing forces. Like on the one hand, you have, dude, I mean, this is a scary flop. You should protect your equity, right? I mean, you should probably be betting your straights and your sets. But then on the other hand, he has top sets. He's blocking the thing that he's getting the most value from, right? So he is in the realm of two opposing situations. Like usually sometimes when people check back monsters, typically it's top set, right? I mean, because it's blocking the thing that you get the most value from, namely the most combos, which is usually top pair and a decent kicker. So he's blocking all the 10x hands. So he's thinking to himself, well, I might as well just check. So it's a situation where he should be betting with sets, but also he should be sort of like if he ever traps, he can just check back sometimes with the top set. So he's sort of like conflicted. So we have that this is such a surprise, such an excellent example that you brought. I mean, it's beautiful. Isn't that wonderful how, you know, these two things are like fighting each other perhaps in their heads and try to see what maybe goes through their minds, and then say, you know what, my top set is more of a slow play. Basically, I'm going to concentrate on the fact that I have a slow playable hand versus I need to protect my equity. And for some reason, that part of his, you know, debate won.
I think it is definitely likely that they would be checking like their overpairs and stuff too to protect that part of their range.
Okay.
At the depth on 6, 9, 10. Like that's
Sure.
just I
Sure.
assume. I actually assume now that I see that they have 10s that they're probably checking range back on this board, or likely checking the majority of their range back.
If
But
they're balanced, yes. I mean, you know, like, do we have an assumption to think that, you know, these people, that person is
to be honest, so let's go back into the realm of uncertainty, right? Like
right?
this specific player can check back 10s, but that isn't necessarily representative of the entire population of people that
Right.
you're playing against in a,
Right.
you know, a random like 500 no limit Zoom pool.
Right.
So even making extrapolations based on this data set of one can also be a mistake, just
Sure.
because this one villain, they could be the anomaly, right? That
Right.
checks back range. So
Right.
yeah, even there we don't know, right? Which again, like all of this is pointing us towards uncertainty just being just a thing that you most likely just have to accept, right? And
Exactly.
I'll let you ask, you know, your $1 million question, and we can get into some ways that we can affect that.
No, absolutely. I mean, you know, the one thing that I want to know, and I think a lot of my students want to know, a lot of people want to know, is that, Duncan, can we eliminate uncertainty? Is there whether it's a magic pill or something that we can work really, 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 really hard, whether it's science, whatever it may be, you know, huge concentration, meditation, whatever you want to call it, some Zen attitude towards life. Is there any way to eliminate uncertainty?
So I would say limiting it to poker, the poker sense, right? Because I think in life it's just a fact of life. Like I think like yeah. But in a poker sense, I guess it's just, so since it's philosophical Friday, we can go
Yes,
out of like a
please.
long enough timeline, right? Like in a long
Go
enough
ahead.
timeline,
It's a
I can
difficult
probably
question.
eliminate most uncertainty. Like
Yeah.
I am going to die at
Mhm.
some point, most likely in the next, you know, 50 to 75 years, or I guess most likely the next 40. God, it sucks getting older, getting closer to those years. But I mean, uncertainty on that
I'm
timeline.
laughing only because I'm in the same way, right? I mean, it's not it. That's what else can you do, right? I mean,
It,
laugh it up.
laugh at it, right? Like,
Yeah.
I'm pretty certain that one day the sun's going to explode
Mm-hmm.
and blow up the earth, which means human civilization is going to be no longer on a long enough timeline.
We
So
probably
I
are,
think
are a big favor to have a nuclear war before that.
that's true.
Yeah.
But just to make sure, you know, that's the
Sure.
curb stomp of humanity right
Yeah.
there. It's like, okay, like, yeah, maybe most of you blew up in the nuclear holocaust. Some of you are underground, but you know, now we're just gonna blow up the sun, and best of luck surviving that, you know. Um, so I think like these are things that are certain to me, is that one day my body will stop functioning, and that's it. And then my specific life is over. Beyond that, I think in a poker sense, um, you can't. So you can eliminate uncertainty, but it's in becoming stronger at the game, in knowing like what your pre-flop strategy is, facing a spectrum of different pre-flop actions and different formations. Like, so you can eliminate like uncertainty in that way, but you can't eliminate what hand you're going to get. You can't
Mhm.
eliminate the situations that are going to manifest in
Right.
your specific poker session, which is one of the reasons that makes poker such a difficult game, is that you don't know what's going to happen, right? You prepare for a specific situation, you run a sim, you study it for hours, and then you play 5 sessions in a row, and that scenario just never comes up, right? So it's like, great, I was prepared for nothing,
Right.
a thing that didn't ever manifest. So
As a side note, hopefully, that study actually helps you with other things which can be neighboring to what you were studying, not that specific scenario, but some other scenarios. Just so hopefully
exactly.
that was not for naught. You learn how to think, and that can be helpful in its own right.
Right, which is kind of the goal, right? The goal
Right.
is to like upgrade your logic, upgrade your thought
Right.
process, and upgrade your understanding of how these spots should be fundamentally played.
Mhm.
Results wise, you can't control that. You can't eliminate it. I think the only thing you can focus on is your understanding of the spots and the actions that you take in those situations. So I think, like, in that way, you can't eliminate uncertainty. After you're all in and you're just like fading whatever, or you need to hit, then you can't eliminate that uncertainty. And I don't think you would want to. At least I wouldn't want to. I want the sweat. I value the sweat. It's fun to me.
Mhm.
So I think the ways to like basically mitigate or lessen uncertainty in poker is just to study, grow, be a stronger poker player, and just be well developed so that you have an idea of what to do in these situations when they arise. Because the time to prepare is the time to prepare, but when you're in the battle, you typically don't learn very well, and you're not going to perform very well. And so that's not the time to be like coming up with strats when you're in the moment. It's away from the table.
Absolutely. And it's a time to act. And this is actually a perfect segue, what you're saying. The time of battle is not a time to learn. Why is that? Because even though we are faced with uncertainty, there cannot be any uncertainty in our decisions. That's the huge discrepancy. That's the birth of meta humility. Everything around us is uncertain, but we have to decide whether we're going to go left or we can go right. We can't go 70% left and 30% right.
Yep.
That's not how life works. Our decisions are fully deterministic. So there's a discrepancy between the uncertainty of our environment and the certainty of our actions. So we have to find a way to actually mitigate this. And that would be the word that I would use: mitigate, not eliminate. We're not eliminating the fact that we don't know which decision is right. We will never know. However, we can incorporate as much evidence as possible, right? And hopefully we make a decision which more often than not is the right one, or more often than not, it gives us a desirable outcome, which is exactly, to your point, why in the heat of the battle, we cannot actually be undecided. This is exactly why we need meta humility. In the time of battle, we have to be super confident, arrogant, if you will. I'm gonna go left, and I know this is the right decision based on the information I have right now. That's meta humility. That's the parenthesis, based on the information I have right now. I'm gonna go left, and you're not gonna change my mind right now. Now it's the moment of action. Measure twice, cut once. Excuse me. Measure twice, cut once. I'm cutting right now. Get out of my head. Right? It's not a time for me to study and to like. I'm going left. I'm going right. Whatever decision you have to make at that point. And I think that is very, 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 very important. And
Yeah.
and go ahead.
No, you can finish your thought.
I was about to just to say something else about, like, the biggest. I guess we can open it as a new thread. The biggest objection that I hear about uncertainty, and I just want to follow up with that later. But
Gotcha. I was gonna say, like, the quote from Abraham Lincoln, right? Like, give me 5 hours to chop down a tree. I spend the first four sharpening the axe.
right,
Like, when you go to take the action of cutting down the tree, you don't get to sharpen the axe at that point. You're in
it's over.
there, right? It's
That's right.
over.
It's over. Exactly. And this is very important. I think it is, at least to me, that's such an important revelation. That's why I wanted to give it a special name. When you're acting, when you're saying something, when you're doing something, when you're exercising, there's no time for learning in that moment. You gotta act. It doesn't matter how wrong you are at that moment. Embrace your wrongness. That's where meta-humility lives. Understanding that you're so wrong at that point, but you don't care. Understanding like my own stupidity, how stupid I am every moment of my life, accepting that stupidity and still powering through it, remembering the back of my head of my stupidity. I think that's the important part of action, because action and the environment are two completely different things. And the environment is hazy, but the action is very deterministic. Sorry.
What do you value more, certainty or uncertainty?
It's like asking me, are you valuing more the environment that you live in, or are you valuing more your decisions? And I would say, I can't choose between my kids, even though I don't have any. Like I would say that these are both part of life. We can't have one without the other, I would say. So, and it's I think
as a poker player, what do you value more?
I want to put it on. I want to answer that question. I guess I don't understand it very well to answer that question. But let me try to understand it by following up questions. So, do you mean in an environment where things are closer to what I'd expect them to be, versus an environment where things are more vague and more hazy than expected to be?
Yeah, I would look at two different examples here, right? Like, so do you value a situation where, like, you open and you get 3-bet and you have ace queen, or I mean, something along those lines, or you open and you get 3-bet,
you have aces or something,
versus short stack and you have aces, right?
Right.
Like which one of those, the spots that are like slam dunk easy, certain, or the ones that you're uncertain about?
Okay, that's an easy question for me to answer, and the answer is, of course, I'm going to go with the former, right? Because the former, if it's something that I'm uncertain about, there's room to growth, right? And for growth, there's room for me to grow, and obviously, I want to be in a spot like this, because that spot, even though it's going to make me uncomfortable, hopefully it's going to make me a better poker player in the long run. Which is the reason, I'm always telling my wife, sometimes she tells me, why do you play this like really hard video games? It's like, you're suffering. It's like, yeah, but I get better at it. Okay. I'm learning something. So yeah, definitely the former.
That's the answer that I was expecting.
Yeah.
I was trying to lob you up a grapefruit there. An easy softball question, but I didn't frame it correctly. But yes, like I expect you to value the uncertainty more from a poker perspective than the certainty, right?
Right.
And I think that is atypical compared to the general poker population. I think the general population does not value uncertainty in that way. They value certainty. They want to be sure. They want answers. They want to know what they should do in most situations while they're playing poker. And it can be really detrimental to, their poker journey, I think.
Right. To be fair, though, and the reason why I'm very careful with this kind of questions is because there's something very subtle there. And the subtle part is, if you can actually create a game plan where the second example that you mentioned, the one where you have aces and somebody ships on you, happens very frequently, I would consider that a victory and a desirable outcome, if you know what I mean. So even though in a vacuum, if you tell me which situation would you prefer, the one where you have an easy decision or where you have a tough decision that is going to make you grow, I'm going to say the latter. I'm going to say the second one. There is another question and says, how did I get to these two situations? Because if there is an overarching plan that allows us for a lot of the case A to happen, the one where you have aces and you have easy decisions, that's actually like, in the video gaming world, like having a super build that makes the game easy. If you actually created a super build in a video game where it makes the game easy, props to you, because now you have it. You know what I mean? Now you have easy decisions. So you were able to mitigate uncertainty in a great way. So, and people
try. The super build in poker, I don't think works, right?
I think
it's very detrimental, right? Like it's this thought that I'm sure I've had in my career, especially like
Sure.
in my early 20s, 21, 22. It's like, yeah, maybe tight is right? You just knit it up. You just avoid high variance spots and you just play good
Right.
hands, right? And what ends up happening is you realize, oh, my win rate is totally wrecked, and
Right.
I'm at the sole mercy of like winning hands at showdown. Like when I don't win hands at showdown, I get not just destroyed, but absolutely obliterated and
Right.
demolished, right? Um,
But to be fair, there might be something which is an equivalent of a super build, and that's game selection.
okay,
Right. So you can
that's
like, so there might be things like that. Again, it's a very complicated, it's a very complicated subject. And I would agree with you. Like there are no easy pills, right?
yeah.
But there might be a super build. That super build.
I think there are some private games that are definitely super builds, right? Like I think this is the whole like point of private games. The
Yeah.
people that run it and that are the gatekeepers of private games is right. It's like, oh, I'm going to get all these guys in here. Like I'm going to build my hen house, and then I'm just gonna walk through the front door, and play in this really juicy plus EV situation.
Very good. So to to elaborate on your point, right? I mean, and the idea, like, which would you rather be? Like having uncertainty or certainty. Can uncertainty be used in our favor in any way? Like how can we take advantage of? Is there any way we can take advantage of uncertainty?
I think off the top of my head, so the first thing that I thought about was, uh, I think you can definitely take advantage in certainty in other people, which
Right.
is definitely applies to poker, where guys just think that an action is good. They're certain of it
Right.
to the extent that, like, think of a message board, 2+2, somebody has an opinion on a situation. 20 people agree. They all seem very certain that this opinion is the gospel.
Hmm.
And a lot of times in my experience, I have a completely different opinion in these spots, right? Where I think, like I'm not exactly certain, but I'm not certain that this is correct, right? And I think that that really hinders most players' ability to learn and evolve. Um, so, how do we use certainty to our advantage? I mean, when we're playing poker with, more certainty as what actions to take, I think it makes it to where we don't carry such large cognitive load. We don't have a burden of just thinking a lot about situations. When we sort of have these things, we're certain that this is how this hand should be played. I think it minimizes anxiety. I
Hmm.
think it minimizes central nervous system reactions
Hmm.
to these situations, because you have a plan and you're confident that that plan is good for X, Y, or Z situation. So I think that like uncertainty is good in just having more efficient energy usage when you're at the poker table, and also for growth as a poker player too. I think it gives you space that allows you to think deeper about the situations that merit deeper thought. Whereas when you invest a lot of energy into situations that should be automatic, over an extended period of time, you just wear down to where you're not thinking, you don't have the capacity or energy to think deeply in spots that probably merit it.
That's very well said. And also, and another thing is that uh, essentially you alluded to that earlier. The idea that if we understand that things are uncertain and we embrace that uncertainty, but our opponents do not, there's actually a very easy way to exploit. And an example of that would be, I mean, there's several examples, but one example of that would be making value bets. Like making a value bet, your opponent might get curious. Is he bluffing? Is he, value betting? But because they cannot handle the uncertainty, they want to look us up. Right? That's obviously a very simplified example, right? I mean, like, it's the idea that curiosity can literally like kill the cat in a spot like this. Well, not literally, but nearly. Like
Mm-hmm.
it applies here. So, so the embracing uncertainty versus not embracing uncertainty can actually create that discrepancy. The other thing too is, like, I often joke that when I see irresponsibility in society, like in any way, right? I mean, somebody is like, not returning my calls, or not knowing how to do business, or showing up late. I'm thinking to myself, the first thing that comes to mind is, there's my edge. Because if there is a person who doesn't know how to do their job right, it means that if you can't do your job right, immediately you're going to be ahead of that person in a vacuum, right? Something similar happens to poker. If somebody can handle uncertainty, if you can actually handle uncertainty, then you're going to be one step ahead. That's going to be your edge. That's, of course, ties to the idea of reciprocality from Tommy Angelo.
Yeah, so I think when you say that, I just imagine like 70-year-old, 60-year-old poker players who play cash games and have been playing since the 80s and have the same style, have never evolved, and are very certain that what they're doing is the best way to go.
Or
about
worse yet,
playing
they've been playing
cards.
since the 80s and they still haven't changed.
Right, exactly, right? They're just certain, right? This is how you play. This is what you do.
Right.
You don't do this, you don't do that. And I think that like poker is just such a ripe ground for experimentation and
Right.
learning and growth. And the more that I've learned, and I've studied poker more than most humans that are walking on the earth, the more that I learn, the more I realize I don't know, and the more curious I get, and the more areas I try to explore. So uncertainty has served me well in my poker career, and I wouldn't be where I'm at without uncertainty. So yeah, I think that like definitely we can leverage uncertainty to our advantage, and we can pit opponent's certainty against them. And I would say that one sort of telltale sign as it relates to the people in your inner network when you're discussing poker is if you're with someone who's very certain about things, and they dominate the conversations, you should probably find a different poker network to participate in.
Right. I would actually agree with that. There's no room for. I would say it applies in everyday life too. You don't want to be in an environment where somebody wants to dominate the conversation. Don't get me wrong. There are situations where naturally a person who happens to have either more experience or for whatever reason, there might naturally, gravitate towards a specific person, and then they end up talking more. But that's natural, not habitual, which is a different thing.
Look for indicators like I don't know, right? Let's see, let's think about this. Let's try to figure this out. Like these are the questions that like you want to hear, that show that somebody wants to investigate and they're okay with saying they don't know.
Absolutely.
And I think I tend to value I don't know way more than people who are very certain about what you should do in X, Y, or Z. So yeah.
Yeah, that's meta humility, right there, right? I mean, and this is incredibly important. Remembering that we don't know, but at the same time, that doesn't, like, the fact you say and I do too. We say the words "I don't know." It doesn't mean we don't act. That's the difference, right? I don't know versus I don't act are two different things. I don't know, and yet I have to act, which means
I don't know. But here are some general heuristics that I have about this spot. This is what I understand about the situation in general. So I'm not exactly sure, but this is what I think is the best, right? That basically means that this is the action you're taking, and you leave the door open for further investigation down the line.
Absolutely. And speaking of heuristics, what are some good heuristics we can use to deal with uncertainty?
I think that as it relates to poker in the micro sense, you should capture when you're uncertain. You should capture the scenarios. You should bucket them. You should figure out where you're unsure, where you're struggling. I think these are, just gaining an awareness of that feeling that you feel when you don't know, which should be a feeling we're all familiar with. I hope anyway, because I feel it like every day, all the time.
Yeah, I know.
24/7, right? So like when you have an awareness of that feeling, use it as a tool to investigate and learn and grow as a poker player, instead of just dismissing it, right? Or wanting to will it away and asking people what is the answer here, right? Because most of the time in poker, there's not an answer. There's a bunch of answers, but you get an opinion on, a hand from 5 different players, a hand that's particularly tricky. Their opinion is probably going to be different, right? Which, yeah, just shows you the level of like uncertainty that there is, and how we're all trying to just do the best that we can with the information that we have.
Absolutely. So identification would be number one. How about, and that was the thing I forgot to mention it earlier, how about the students who keep asking me, well, Duncan, I don't know what my opponent has. I don't know if they have, I have top pair, top kicker, let's say on that 10-9-6, I have ace 10, and I don't know if they have two pair plus, or who knows, like at that point. And then should I raise for information, which is like the classic old, question that people are doing, when they're starting out. How do we answer to those people who instinctively they're trying to eliminate uncertainty as opposed to accept it and mitigate it? How do we answer to those students?
I'm actually going to throw that back to you.
Sure.
Because you run your college poker class, and I'm sure that this is like something that you've thought about a ton. So yeah, let me hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, this is something that indeed I have thought a lot, and I think again it ties back to the idea that we're uncertain about our environment, but we have to be certain about our action. So my answer is twofold. First of all, step one, we have to accept there's absolutely zero way, and I mean none, to know if we're ahead or behind in that situation. None. So we can, like in that specific hand, which actually immediately makes their hand irrelevant, because we can never possibly know whether we're ahead or behind. So the question then translates, and that at least that is something that I use as a heuristic. The question is, given those circumstances, after you do an analysis, which we can talk about for a long time, this is the second part of my answer anyway. So if your final answer is, I think more often than not, I'm going to be ahead, play your hand deterministically, certainly, confidently, as if you are ahead. So you have to essentially make your action be deterministic. You cannot allow the uncertainty of your environment spill into your decisions. So your decisions have to be certain one way or another. You have to go left or right. Of course, you're going to make that decision. I'm not saying it's easy to decide whether you're going to make left or right, but my point is, once you decide I'm going to play this hand as if I am ahead, or ahead the range, if we want to be more elaborate, but I'm oversimplifying a little bit on purpose. So if you decide that you're going to play the hand as if you're ahead and you end up being behind, is completely irrelevant, because you did the right thing with the information you had at the time. That's my point. So like people who say, oh, you know what, but they had a better hand. It doesn't matter. What was your thought process, right? So essentially the heuristic is we are completely ignoring our opponent's hand, which doesn't matter. So we're moving our thought process outside of the thing that we don't control. And that is the subtle point. We don't let uncertainty spill into our decisions. That's what I'm trying to say. Because if you decide to raise for information in a spot like this, you're basically letting uncertainty spill into your decision. You say, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I'm going to raise. I'm still not sure. See what they do, and then I'm going to decide. No. You either think you're ahead or you think you're behind. Which one is it? You can be wrong. I'm happy to be wrong. I want you to be wrong. I'm going to celebrate if you're wrong, because then you can update your priors and you can be a better poker player, right? So, but which one is it? Do you think you're ahead or you're behind? Usually they have an answer.
Yeah, so
go with it.
Reject the question, right?
Right.
The answer is just reject the question. I love that. And
right.
Couldn't have said it better myself. The thing that you are in control of is how you think about the hand, and breaking apart the data points that you're prioritizing, what you're seeing, what you're not seeing, and what you know about each individual action and each individual decision point in the hand, and then what you know collectively about all the actions taken up to this point added together, right? That's the thing that you can upgrade to do a better job of hand reading and coming to better decisions, which is the ultimate end goal. Unfortunately, in this game, you just don't get to know exactly what villain had unless they're showing you. So that's all that you can work with. That's the only thing that is within your control, is the way that you think about the hand, upgrading that, and then moving on from there. So ultimately, you have to embrace that uncertainty that you'll never know.
Absolutely. And also be like, train yourself to be happy with your decision. I have an example in the book where, Alex, plays against, a hand against the old man coffee kind of opponent, right? And she has, I believe the hand is, I wrote it a while ago, but she has like something like Queen Jack on the Jack XX board. She bets and she gets like big check raised, and she folds her top pair, third kicker or whatever. And old man coffee shows the good old 10 deuce. I had the Bronson, he says. And Alex says, I made the right decision. I folded the best hand and I'm happy with it. Why? Because I would fold here every single time, nothing to think about, right? Because Alex does, of course, she's an idealistic character, but she doesn't let uncertainty spill into the certainty of her decisions,
Right.
basically. That's
And the one thing that Alex could have done too is like upgrade her
priors.
Yeah, her information about that specific villain and use that as a future data point if the scenario comes up for one reason or another, right? Just something, an extra data point to think about. So it's just like another thing to think about this specific player in the future to help guide your decision making. So like that's the win, right? That's what you win in that situation is you win information, you win knowledge and possibly a better game plan against that specific opponent moving forward into the future. So
Right.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. It's like you fold. And this is like poker's ripe with this, right? You fold the best hand quite often. You fold a hand that would have won quite often, right? That's just
If
the
you don't
nature
fold the
of the
best hand,
sport.
sometimes you don't fold enough, right?
Exactly. And if you
Yeah.
never get caught if you never get caught bluffing, you're not bluffing enough either, right?
Right,
Like you
exactly.
don't want all your bluffs to go through because
That's
that
right.
means that you're bluffing too infrequently. You want to get bluff caught.
Right.
Because really, if you look at risk versus reward and just imagine that you bet like pot on the river, your bluff needs to go through like more than 50% of the time. So if it goes through 60, guess what? You're making money in this bluffing opportunity. And so like you can get bluff caught 40% of the time, you win 6 out of 4, you end up making money, you're happy about that outcome. Whereas if you never bluffed, you're at, 0 for this situation and you've left money on the table. So, yeah, anyway, poker is just this weird ass world where you can make positive EV decisions that make money, and you just get crushed and you have to say, thank you, I'll have another.
Exactly right. I think you're half joking, but I think this might actually be the secret sauce for some people, right? The idea that you lose with the best hand because you actually folded, and you say, "Great!" Like, imagine a situation where your opponent shows you the worst hand and you still fold because you think it's the right thing to do. If you can reach to that point where mine is your opponent literally showing you their cards.
Well, if they literally show you and you still fold, you got some problems.
You got some real problems, right? But I would argue that then you've reached to a point of nearly Zen where like really my opponent's cards don't matter. Of course we're gonna call. That's not the point. But the point that I'm trying to make is right. You know the point that I'm trying to make. Like that thank you that you said, right? I think that's another thing too. It's like you have convinced yourself that, well, it doesn't matter because if we go back in time, we're going to do the same thing with information we have. So you're literally tying your decision based on the available information versus the hidden information. I think that is something as subtle and difficult as it can be important, like it's the confidence in the moment, the near arrogance confidence that I'm folding that hand, I don't care what you have. Because that's the arrogance of the deterministic decision, right?
And it's not intuitive. I think it's something that happens in the Wolf program quite often. Is we're doing hand reviews and like, we'll be looking at like however many hands, 50 hands, and they'll bluff catch like 5 times in a row, lose every single bluff catch, and at the end of every hand, it's like well played, well played, right. well played, well played, good call, well played, right? And it's like they're getting negative feedback, they're getting destroyed, and the coaches are telling them, no, good hand, well played, right? And that's just, it's a tough paradigm to get to in this space. But as poker players, this is where you need to be. You need to be able to say like, well, I played this hand well. I know I played it well, even though I lost, right? I think it's just that's the nature of the game. What we're trying to do is make good decisions, plus EV decisions that we can measure and analyze and look at. And if we do, well, then we do, right? It's like you get it in with King's Pre 5 times in a row, and villain has aces every single time, right? You didn't make bad decisions. You just did what you're supposed to do and you move on. And then you keep getting it in with kings. And over time, you're going to make money. But
Right.
on, with limited sample size, and by the way, most everything is a limited sample size.
Right.
I'm doing database analyses right now with Greatness Village. Did like a limited time sale. I sold out already. I sold 10 of them and 50,000 hands, right?
Right.
You can see like pre-flop information. You can't really see high-level post-flop information. Can't see high-level post-flop information on like the turn, for instance, over a 50K hand sample because like we're 3-bet pots on the turn out of position as pre-flop caller. You just don't get in that many situations to really learn a ton. So it's mostly top level. And when you think about that, like, holy shit, 50,000 hands is not that many hands.
It's not.
And
And to make matters even worse, you can see that even pre-flop, you see like noisy things, like for example, people, getting in more with kings than aces, for example, just a little bit, because there's noise and fluctuation, even pre-flop.
Or like, you're calling, you're defending more facing an EP open from the big blind than an MP open, right?
Right.
And yet, these are all strong players who, have ranges and are trained. And it's just in this 50K data set, they just didn't face as many pre-flop opens from early position and have hands to defend with, right? So it's like there's a lot of noise even in a 50K hand sample, which is more hands than most people will play, like maybe in their lives.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Oh yeah. Most people, for
Especially
sure.
like live players, right? You get 30 hands an hour. I mean, I can't even do the math on how many hours it would take to make 50,000, and you can't even comb through and look back. So it just shows you how flawed we are as humans, and how like limited data sets can influence us and create biases negatively. And so like the one thing that is in your control is how you think about these situations.
Exactly.
And that's the thing that you can control. And that's it. Other than that, you just say, okay, this is an uncertain world. I'm going to do the best that I can, and have confidence in the situations that merit me having confidence, and have humility when I realize I am not certain about this situation. Right?
That's right. And the only thing that I would add to that paradigm is also where you focus your attention, right? And in the things that you can control, but also you're focusing your attention not on your opponent's cards, but rather on the situation. And I know this is very, very, very subtle, because what I'm saying is that if you're actually focusing on the situation, the cards of your opponent become irrelevant. And I cannot stress that enough. Like the moment where literally the cards of your opponent become irrelevant in your mind, you think you feel it in your bones. I think that's where you can have a transformative experience as a poker player. The cards of your opponent are irrelevant, right? They only matter for future hands, not for the present hands. It doesn't matter what your opponent shows you at the end of the hand at all.
Yeah. Well, and as one final point here, I would say they are relevant to, as you just said. I just want to state it, like,
yes,
it is relevant after the hand, right? Like if you get surprised, like in the hand that I talked about, where like we thought villain, would most always bet their sets or their strong hands on this board, they wouldn't check back those type of hands, and then villain shows up with a hand that they did check back that was one of those hands, top set. Then that gives you like a potential opportunity to upgrade how you see that situation moving forward into the future. So when you get surprised, when villain shows up with something totally unexpected, that's another indicator that like you need to think about this situation more, because you're missing some pieces here. There are things and opportunities to learn about this situation, and how villains construct ranges and all that jazz.
But you still play the hand correctly based on the assumptions you
made.
Correct.
Based on the information you have. Like if I had, if I could count the number of times where like, I wish I would have seen a hand before I played another hand against that same villain. It's cost me millions of dollars over my career, where it's like, you bluff catch against a guy that you don't know anything about, and then you sit there and you watch him never bluff again for the next year, right? It's like, oh, cool. Like, but you don't have that information, right? And as you collect information and then use that information to upgrade how you think, this is the path of a poker player. You're capturing data points, you're capturing information, you're constantly calibrating how you think about these situations and how these opponents play and what your alternative counter strategy should be. This is like, you have to love this aspect of the game because this is the game of poker.
This is the game. Exactly. This is literally the game. Exactly correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool, man. I
Yeah.
think great stuff. And I think we can put a pin in here. I'm uncertain about calling it right now, but it is what it is.
So am I, but I think it went well.
Yeah, we're very uncertain about things right now. So have a good week. We hope you do. We don't know if you will or not. And we'll catch you next time.
Likewise. Take care, man.